Before we dive into programming patterns, let us talk about what they are for. So why do we even need to study programming patterns and for what we can use them? Well, the idea in programming or behind programming patterns, and that's also a philosophy with Unity as well, is to separate every component from each other. And I have prepared here 4 scripts to demonstrate that. So if I go here inside of the Visual Studio, every script is empty, so no code, we are not going to execute anything. But what you usually see in every single tutorial online, and unfortunately some courses, is that when the person who is creating the video starts creating some sort of script, for example, the movement. He puts everything in the movement. He puts the health in the movement. He puts the animation system in the movement. He puts the attack system in the movement. Everything is in one single class. And that is not a good way to program. And that is where programming patterns come into place because it separates every functionality for itself. For example, the movement functionality is a functionality on its own and it should be separated in a single class. Attack is also a separate functionality that should be in its own class. The weapon system or the weapons as well, the health as well. And these classes only communicate with each other with essential data that we need to know. For example, if the player's health is greater than 0, then we can move. We would get that info from the health class within the movement class. So we would do something like if health, and you get the point, if health is greater than 0, then we will be able to get the input from the player and we would be able to move. Now, within these classes themselves, we could also have separate functionality. For example, here in the attack class, this can be the attack handler class, and we can have different attacks. For example, the player can punch, he can kick, he can also shoot bullets, he can maybe throw magic spells or whatever, or have some abilities to fly and all of that stuff. Every single one of those abilities, they can be separated. Why do we need to do it like that? Simply for maintenance or maintenance, how that word is pronounced, I don't know. Anyways, it is much easier to maintain code that is separated from all other codes and it's on its own than to have everything here grouped up with, gazillion lines of code, and then we would have to search where is what and what did we do, what we need to change, and so on and so forth. For example, here in the attack class, we can have different types of attack. We can have the fireball, and that can be a separate class, and we can call it fireball ability, and it will have its own damage system that can also be a separated class, and so on and so forth. But what's the point here? When we want to attack over here, we could have a function that we can call public void throw fireball, for example, and then we would use that fireball class, and of course inside of that class we would define what it will do when we call it to throw a fireball. But what's the point? Later on in our game, if we decide that we want to upgrade that fireball attack, or if we have different levels like level 1, 2, 3, and every single time we defeat an enemy, the fireball attack upgrades and it gets more powerful, then it will be very easy to go and open the fireball class and then add those changes. Where opposed, if we coded all of that here, then we will have to search it among maybe hundreds of others abilities that our character can have in the game, and it can get messy really, really quick. And that is why the design patterns matter, and that is why we need to study and learn them. Also, I mentioned in the beginning, that's what Unity prefers. And I talk about this a lot in my tutorials on YouTube, in my academy as well. And that is, Unity prefers that you have every functionality for your game object separate. So if you want to move the character, create one script for that. If you want to animate him, create one script for that. Same as what I'm doing in my courses and tutorials. If you want to have an attack functionality, separate that in a separate class and attach all those classes on a single game object. And let me just see if I attach them here on the player. I mean, it doesn't matter, but yeah, it will be attached like this. All these classes would be attached on the object, and they would perform different actions that will form our game. So this is, in short, what are programming patterns and for what we can use them and why they are essential for us as game developers to know. And what we learn here, I'm currently doing that with C# and Unity, but these same principles apply in software development. They apply with Unreal Engine C++ development as well, even though I plan to cover that separately for C++, but that will be after this. But anyways, you get the point. So now we are going to start with, let's say, the first lecture within the series of the design patterns, and we will see all of these design patterns in action for what we can use them. And everything what I said in this video, if it's not I have issues when I want to say crystal clear. I need to stop using that word. If everything is not crystal clear, there you go. What I said in this video, it will be after we cover each design pattern and explain for what we are going to use it and demonstrate with an example for what we are going to use it. So that will be it. I will see you guys in the next one. So in short, a design pattern is a reusable solution to common software development problems. Basically, the code we write is reusable. We can easily build upon that code and expand it further. When we come back to that code after 3 months or 6 months or 1 year, we will know what that code is doing because it is written in a way that we can understand. And what's even more important, other people who see or explore or skim through our project will understand what the project is about. So the number one rule, or the first most important thing when it comes to design patterns as to how you can avoid all of that confusion that can happen in your code, all of that messy things that can happen, is by naming your variables. So you need to take this really seriously, especially when you're working on a big project. Half of the job is naming your variables, because when you give your variables a meaningful name, then you are basically documenting the code by itself. And this is something that you probably heard before, because we have comments that we can add, and we know that, just add 2 backslashes or backslash and then star and backslash, or however this is called. Anyways, you can add comments with that. But the programming world in general is against of adding comments in your code, because the idea is the code should document itself, meaning you should give meaningful names to your variables in the first place, to your classes, to your functions or methods, however you want to call them, so that when somebody else looks at your code, looks at your variables and sees the names, he will understand what that variable is intended for based on the name of the variable. That's why generic names like integer a, for example, is not the way to go. For example, if we want to use it as a speed variable and we want to say vector 3 temp is equal to transform dot position, and then we want to move the character on his x-axis, saying temp dot x plus equals a multiplied with time dot delta time, and then reassigning it back, transform position is equal to temp. This is not the way to go. Of course, this is what we learned so far in the academy, and that is pretty clear. One thing that I want to mention is it's totally fine to use these arbitrary names in loops. So when you use a for loop for int I is equal to 0, that is totally fine. You don't have to give some meaningful name over here for the I variable, because as soon as somebody looks at the loop, he will understand, okay, this is for the loop, and that is totally fine. But also when you have, and this happens a lot in health classes, so you have, for example, float health, and then over here you have a float maximum health, so float max health. It might get confusing. Now, I'm not saying it will always be like that, but it might be confusing, okay, for what we are using the health variable. It is maybe better to rename it to current health, and this way we understand this is the current health, this is the maximum health, and so on and so forth. So take time when you are naming your variables, especially for a big project, because you want to know for what the variable is. If you went through my course, the most comprehensive guide to Unity 3, and it was the section about the top-down shooter, that is a really nice example of naming variables. We had a lot of variables in terms of shooting, so in terms of the guns and the bullets that we put in those guns. So we have bullets per mag, bullets to be spawned, or bullets remaining in mag. This is on top of my head. I cannot remember exactly the names of the variables. Maybe I will, remove a sentence or two, but if you go in that section in that course, you will see the names of the variables, and you can clearly understand from every name for what that variable is intended for. And this is how you should be programming from the very start. So keep this in mind. This is the most important thing, because if you mess this up, no matter how many design patterns you implement, no matter what you do, you might get confused because you are using weird names for the variables. So that is the number one rule before we dive into design patterns and take a look at what they are and, for what we can use them and so on and so forth. And that will be it for this video. If there are any questions, make sure that you ask in the comment down below. And you know the drill. I will see you in the next one. Let's talk about the most widely used pattern and the most controversial pattern in programming in general, and not only in Unity, which is the Singleton pattern. And the Singleton pattern is basically, we have one instance of an object. Only one copy can exist of that object in the whole game at any given time and point. And we saw a lot of examples of this pattern in our academy, in the academy that is. We saw managers, we saw controllers, we saw audio handlers, and so on and so forth, which had a single responsibility and only one copy of that object was available in the game during the lifetime of the game. So why is a singleton so controversial yet so widely used? Because we have a static, or we create a singleton by using a static instance. For example, over here, I have already prepared this project. You can download it under this lecture, the preparation part that is, or you can create it on your own. It's basically 2 buttons in the scene, and we have these objects in the scene. Very simple, nothing complicated. So over here, I have the singleton object. Well, it's not yet a singleton, but how it goes is we create a public, so over here, public static, and this is the problem. So FX audio player, and I say instance. The problem with static is that it is a global variable. It's not a local variable. So what is a local, what is a global variable? A local variable is only accessible within the class over here, and it cannot be accessed outside of this class except if we have public setters and getters for that variable, of course. But we cannot say in some other class, okay, fx audio dot and some variable and access it. Whereas with a static variable, we can simply say fx audio player dot instance, and there you go, we can access it. And that is why it makes it a global variable, and that is why also it makes it controversial to use, because the idea of programming is not having global variables and only encapsulating data and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I really don't see any other solution except for having a variable or a class that can be accessed from anywhere in the program for some of these uses. For example, how can I know which character I have selected in the main menu so that I can load that character in the gameplay scene? Yes, we can save that data. I can load the character and I can then save that data, but that's too hustle for a simple task. I will have to save the data. Then when I load the gameplay, I will have to load that data, which, makes a lot of work for a simple task. Now, moving forward, and we will see all of that and I will explain that. So in order to create a singleton, we do that in the awake function, and we test if that instance is not equal to null. So if the instance is not equal to null, or actually if it's equal to null, that is, then we create the instance. And then over here we will say instance is equal to this, and then we say don't destroy unload game object. Otherwise, so else, if the instance is not null, that means we should destroy the duplicate. And we will explain this in a second, but we can also create it the vice versa way. As I said, we can test if instance is not equal to null. So over here goes null. Then we can destroy the game object over here. And then else, over here we can do this. So it can be done both ways. Essentially, it's the same, same lines of code, just written vice versa. So what's happening over here? Well, essentially over here, we're testing if this instance is equal to null, meaning we have no reference to this instance. Then we're going to say instance is equal to this, referring to this class. Don't destroy unload game object will make this game object go between scenes, which is this one, FX audio player. Because if I don't have this, for example, I'm just going to quickly comment this out so that we can understand what is going on. If I go back in the editor, the scene is already prepared. If you have downloaded the package that is available, you will see this. The only thing we need to do is go here in the file and build settings and make sure that we add the scenes in the build so that we can load them. If we don't do that, we will not be able to load them. So make sure that you add scene 1 and scene 2. And let's go back here in scene 2 because this is where we have the FX audio player, who is the object that is going to play the FX sound effects. Now, when I run the level and press over here the button to go to scene 1. Now I'm currently in scene 1. We do not have over here the FX audio player. And this is why we use don't destroy unload, because every single time we load a new level, all objects in the previous level are destroyed. And if we need an object to be over here, then we need to use don't destroy unload, which is over here. This is that bad boy. Look at that. So now when I uncomment this, we will notice if I go back in the editor again, and let's wait for Unity to load and all of that stuff. So press play over here. And when I am now in the scene 2, we see that we have this over here. It says don't destroy unload. And over here we have the FX audio player. If I press scene 1 and go to scene 1, we will also notice that I have over here the FX audio player. And this is why we use don't destroy unload. Now, going back to testing if instance is equal to null, and then over here we're destroying the game object. Because somebody might say, why shouldn't we just use this? We can remove the else and only have this over here. So if instance is equal to null, it will be equal to this. And then we will say don't destroy unload game object. And there you go. Everything is fine and, top notch. Well, it might be like that, because if I go over here, and if I hit the play button right now, hoping that Unity will load. So now when I press the play button, we are again inside of scene 2. If I press over here to go to scene 1, we still have over here FX audio player, which is, fine. If I go back to scene 2, let's see what happens. Again, we have the FX audio player, but notice here, we have now 2. We have a duplicate. And this is the problem why we need to destroy the duplicate, because every single time this will test, so the object is in the scene, and every time the scene is loaded, it will perform this same test. If we don't destroy the duplicate, that's, the copy of the original is the one that is created first, then, this will happen. We have duplicates, and this is not a singleton anymore. That's why we need to use over here else, destroy, and passing the game object to destroy itself. Because now if I go back again, and we will demonstrate that. So now when I go back inside of scene 1, and if I hit the play button to load the game, here we have again the FX audio player. If I go to scene 1, we have the FX audio player. Everything is cool. Everything is normal. If I go back to scene 2, let's see if we have the duplicate. No, we don't. You see, the duplicate has been destroyed because the first one that is created over here is the original one, because, we destroy the duplicates. And this is why we use don't destroy unload, and then over here why we use destroy game object, because this will destroy the duplicate. So now that that is clear, this is how we make sure this is a singleton, and that's why, or hence the name singleton, because it's a single. It's not like he doesn't have a girlfriend, so don't try to, marry the singleton. No, that's just his name. And usually you will see it being declared like this: static, name of the class, and then instance. And then you would see it set up similar like this, if not identical, because different people, different programmers, they set up this in a different way or different ways, but essentially it all comes back to this. If the instance is equal to null, then instance is this. Don't destroy this game object, unload, and over here destroy the duplicate. Essentially everything comes back to this point. So what is the point of the singleton? Well, the point is now I can go over here. I can say, for example, public void play, not player, but play explode sound fx, for example. And over here, I'm simply going to use debug log because we're not going to create an RPG game in this course. I'm just showing you programming principles. Explode sound. There you go. I can go inside of the UI button handler, and over here for the function or method, however you want to call it, access singleton, which we will be able to access when we press the button, I am going to call the fx audio player dot instance dot play explode sound. And that would be it. If I go back inside of the editor and hopefully start Unity, because Unity is becoming more and more like Unreal for whatever reason, I do not know. Anyways, let's go here in the console. If I press here access singleton, there you go. We have the scene name is scene 2, and over here we have the explode sound effect. Let's go in scene 1. If I hit the play button, I'm going to clear everything and press over here access singleton. The same thing, except now we see scene 1 and then explode sound effect. Let's go back to scene 2, press it. Over here we have scene 2 now. Look at that. So scene 1, explode sound, scene 2, explode sound, which means that this FX audio player has been moving with us from one scene to another, which we saw that. And this is why this pattern is important in Unity, because you will need almost every single game. I have never created a single game that goes from scene to scene and needs to pass data from one scene to another scene that doesn't use a singleton. Simply, that pattern is a must. You do need to be careful, because the fear over here over singleton is the following, that we can use this instance and we can access basically any public method or any public variable, which is true, but you need to be careful with that so that you don't access the methods or functions or variables that you don't want to access in other classes. So you will make that sure by, being aware what you are doing, because that's the whole fear about singletons and why people think they should not be used, and people are offering other alternatives. But at the end of the day, all those alternatives for a singleton come back to having a single object that you can either access using a static variable, or you will have to use game object find and then find that variable and still be able to access public variables from that variable. So as I said, at the end of the day, all of the solutions that are in quotes different than a singleton come back to the fact that you have a single object of a certain type of script, for example, FX audio player, and you access that script either via the public static instance of it, or using game object find and getting a reference to it, or whatever, but you will still be able to access that class, that script, and its public functions and variables. So at the end of the day, you just only need to be careful to not overuse the singleton pattern, and don't create a singleton for every purpose that you want in your game. Just be wise about that. Think about before you create a singleton. Do I need a singleton for this? Is there a better way how I can implement this particular part for my game, or I actually need to use a singleton? And that way you will avoid overusing of a singleton pattern and not stumble upon problems later on, so on and so forth. But in my personal opinion, and I might be wrong, if you have a better solution, please do give it down below this lecture, because I want to learn, improve myself. Other students also want that. So if you have something better, please comment down below. But in my personal opinion, I don't think singletons are that bad if you are careful, because they're really useful. And at the end of the day, all other solutions, and I have searched and searched and searched online, everything else that I saw comes back to the fact that you have a single object that you need to access. So you get the same thing. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on that, and I will see you in the next video. This was just a slight preview of design patterns and what you can learn in the course that's inside my Game Development Academy that talks about this in more detail and shows you more design patterns, how you can use them in Unity with C#, and how you can become a better programmer by writing clean code. So if you want to continue this series, make sure that you check out my Game Development Academy. Link is down below. Enroll. You have me at your disposal to help you if you get stuck, and you will learn a lot of things that you will not learn anywhere else. So I will see you inside the Academy.